All right, we are live. We did it. Welcome back to another Playful Humans podcast. And we're going to talk with Chris Miller from the Talk to People podcast, which is awesome because we're talking to people. And I was on his podcast too. So if you go check out Talk to People, wherever you're watching or listening to this, you'll find out his podcast and see a episode with me on there. And we're going to talk about podcasting in general. We've been doing this for over 2.5 years here, and we haven't really talked about podcasting yet, Chris. So I'm excited to do it. It's the Playful Humans podcast. More information at playfulhumans.com. And you can find Chris at captureconnectionstudios.com as well. All right, here we go. You ready to dance?
Let's get it.
There we go.
Oh, wow. You actually danced. There we go.
You can do a tiny dance.
I like to pick one of the drums.
I like to act it out.
This is like Ellen DeGeneres.
You do.
Yeah.
All right, one more woohoo.
Yeah.
Now, as you know, Chris, we like to start with the joke of the week here on the Playful Humans podcast. And the joke of the week this week is brought to you by Spell Check. If you are a bad wizard or witch, you might want to check out our new Spell Check program.
Oh.
All right, here's the official joke of the week. Why do teenage girls only go to the bathroom in groups of 3, 5, or 7?
Oh, why?
Because they can't even.
Oh, I can't even. That's right. That's a good one.
All right, do you have one for us?
Yeah. Have you heard of the new restaurant called Karma?
Ooh, no.
Well, it's an interesting restaurant. There's no menu. You only get what you deserve.
There you go. I like that. There you go. That'll get us started in the right mindset. Thanks for playing along. Yeah. Now, Chris, let's talk about your project first and Talk to People podcast. Why did you start this one? And tell us a little bit about, kind of how it's different, what it's all about.
Yeah. Well, first off, this is so fun. I love that. I've been on several podcasts and we both host a podcast, but the fact that you set the energy like that is incredible. And I've been trying to think of that with my podcast, make it more of an experience, right? Rather than just of questions. So I'm taking notes from you, sir. But my podcast, the Talk to People podcast, it is about the importance and power of social connection. And the whole premise is life is better when you talk to people. With my life, I noticed I was working for this large corporation, a big tech company, traveling every week. And I noticed I was never around consistent people in community. And I started reading these reports about the loneliness epidemic and the friendship recession. And it made me think of how it's a much larger issue than just what I was dealing with. So I've done 35 episodes of bringing different people on. You were a really good person to bring on because you talk about the importance and power of play. And I think one of the best ways for people to spend time together is to be playful because it makes life a lot better. Yeah. So we got to do a little collaboration there. But the reason why I started my podcast and the goal of my podcast is to talk to people about social connection and then to encourage others to connect to themselves around them.
I love that you do it live too.
Yeah.
I think it's so easy to just default to Zoom and do it virtual like this, which I have a great time with. I get to interview people from all around the world and stuff, and there's some benefits to that too. But doing it in person is a completely different experience. And I know you even invited me into your home, which is, another kind of cool experience. You get to see somebody in a completely different way and really get to know them and what they're about versus and meet their pets and stuff too, versus a virtual background that you don't know where they are in the world, right?
Right. Yeah. And the communication studies are really interesting regarding the fulfillment of, you got texting and phone calls and video calls and then in person. And when you're in person, it's as rich as you can get. The downside is I have to have people who are proximal or people have to travel to the studio. So, but I've been able to get to know my city a little bit. And then, being in the homes, it's more intimate. And of course, you have to be wise there. But it creates the scenario. If I'm encouraging others to get out and connect to those around them, then I want to be able to do that. Now, I have been wondering after year one if I also open up to virtual guests as well. and have like hybrid, because I think that may be a cool way to feature and get conversations with people who aren't around Missouri and Kansas.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility, and it's
Yeah.
not a weakness or like you're giving up on a dream or anything. Like I think you could definitely do that and still accomplish your goals. And hopefully you can blow this thing up big enough that you can start traveling to people. If you can go meet
Yeah.
them in their
Right.
homes and pick your studio and set up, or go to conferences and things and talk to more people live, that would be really cool too. I think that's kind of a dream of mine, is to get these big enough that like if I meet a cool guest from the UK, I just go and record in the UK and do that.
Yeah.
That'd be a heck
You
of a lot of
pack
fun.
up. So on YouTube, there's some pretty large podcasters and they make a living off that, right? They have a production
Yeah.
crew, and then they'll just go and travel and talk to this person or that person and have a big production. So
Or get big enough like Joe Rogan that everybody comes to you and you can just go wherever
yes.
you want and say, if you want to be on the show, you're coming to Austin. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, whenever I met you, I was always wondering why you made your podcast, because you
Mm.
have a career outside of podcasting that you've done, like quite well in, and you spend so much time on this podcast. So it made me wonder, like, I wonder why. So having you on my podcast is really good. But one of the coolest things about podcasting and with the Talk to People podcast is like you bring people in, you talk to them, and you get to understand why they do what they do. And I think that with podcasting, more than likely, we're just really curious people and
Yeah.
we want to learn more and like talk to people. So
It's a
if you
free
could,
education for me, really. I
yeah,
do two podcasts, this one and the How to Succeed podcast for Sandler. And that one's over 600 episodes. So, I mean, I've
yeah,
interviewed 600 sales and leadership experts over the last 8 years. So that's a free education that people would pay, hundreds of thousands of dollars to get their master's degree in business and sales. And I get to learn from all of everybody from PhDs to real world entrepreneurs. I've had billionaires on that podcast.
wow.
There's really cool stuff that I get to learn for free, and I get to help and promote and make other people the spotlight of it too. I think that's the really cool part about this medium, is you don't have to do the heavy lifting. There are podcasts that are all about you, or if you do scripted podcasts, you have to write and create, and it's a creative endeavor. But I love interview shows specifically because
Yeah.
you get to know people, you get to learn from them, and you don't have to do the heavy lifting every week. I can
So
put you on the spot instead.
do you have questions that you ask every guest?
A few. I try to go with like an opening question, something in the middle that I want to know, and then a couple of closing questions, just to make sure that there's some consistency and I know where I'm going if I get lost. But really, after the opening question, I'm kind of digging, trying to find the gold and trying to find the
Yeah,
question. And I heard one earlier when you were talking, so I'm going to make this about you again. You've already interviewed me for like 90 minutes,
go
Chris.
for it.
I'm not letting you flip the script here.
Yeah.
Um, you mentioned the friend recession, and I
Yes.
feel like it was happening already, and then the pandemic made it way worse. And that's one of the reasons I started Playful Humans at the beginning of 2020 was um, it needs to be like, we need to get out of the house. We need to stop having these virtual relationships and clicks and likes on Facebook. Like, why don't we go tell somebody we like their shirt or their vacation photos? Why would we click a button to do that for us? And for me, it's a big deal. Tell me about what you've uncovered in this friendship recession and why you think it's a big deal.
Yeah, the Bureau of Labor Studies in the US, they do a big time survey. So they have tens of thousands of participants, and they go out and they send all these different surveys, and they look at how much time they spend by themselves, how much time they spend with friends, how much time they spend working. Originally, it started as a way to gauge how much time people are working in certain roles, and then from there they could go in and essentially monetize people's times, tell you how much a role should cost and things like that. But
Mhm.
one of the cool takeaways from this is that we get to see how much time people are spending by themselves and then how much time people are spending with friends. And statistically, both those things, they're inverse. So people are spending less time with friends year over year and more time alone. And what's even more interesting is like you can look at it at a week over week or a year over year thing, and you can see like people alone are spending like 40 more hours alone than they typically were which is like one work week, which is interesting to think about. So these people are spending less time alone, or less time together, more time alone. And then there are also, you'll probably see like the loneliness studies, like Cigna, they did a really big
It's so
study.
dangerous for your health and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, really dangerous, because health and life insurance companies want to learn about loneliness, because it, like, goes into the risk of insurance policies. And they did a huge study. Then American Perspective Survey did another big study. And then 2023, the US Surgeon General, the highest elected official for healthcare, he made social connection his priority of 2023. And he said that the
Nice.
Health Humane Society is going to dedicate like all of their efforts to trying to figure out a way that the United States as a whole can address social connection. So there's a lot of attention going towards it. Some of the things we know about loneliness, people are like, what is loneliness? Well, loneliness is a subjective feeling that you lack the social connections you need. And it's going to be different for everybody. That's why there's no silver bullet for a cure for loneliness. Like, you and I may be extroverted, so we may have a higher need for social connection compared to somebody else. And then in loneliness, you have like the intimate loneliness, which is you are craving intimate, close, mutual bond, affection. This could be a romantic partner or a confidant. You got your social loneliness, which is like social support from friends or that companionship, and then collective loneliness. So you want to be a part of a network that shares a sense of interest or belonging. So all of this goes to show how much social connection we actually need. And it also explains why there may be someone who's in a happy marriage, yet they still feel lonely because they lack the friendship, or maybe they lack being a part of a bigger thing. So the more we look at it, the more like layered it becomes. And we recognize social connect or loneliness is no different than like thirst or hunger. It's just a message to our body that we need something. So when you feel lonely, you need social connection. We can't really get rid of loneliness. We're always going to have moments where we feel it, but it's like, okay, well then how can we become more socially connected?
I think that was one of the big discoveries for me, was that I can do these podcasts. I can have virtual interviews. I can be doing presentations in front of thousands of people all day long, and then still end the day lonely, because really I'm in a room by myself all day, and that there are those different levels of connections. And so sometimes I'll just feel like I need to get out of the house and do something with friends. Like I need to see other people. And even if I'm having really deep, engaging conversations and stuff, I need to go like see a stranger. I need a smile. I need to know that I'm like not crazy, get out of my own head. And there's other times where you need that like physical touch too. I just need like a hug. I need to see some people and shake some hands, or engage in like real energy, because I'm not filling that bucket. And I appreciate you sharing that, because I don't think people realize that. I think they think, well, I'm in a marriage and I have kids, so I have people all around. I'm not lonely. But that there's different types of fulfillment that comes from different types of relationships.
Yeah, there is. And a lot of people equate loneliness with social isolation. There's relationships there. Like, social isolation is a risk factor for loneliness. If people are constantly away from others, then there's a higher likelihood that they will feel feelings of loneliness. But these big studies that they go out and they look at all these people, there's like multiple points. So it'll be how often do you feel lonely? And it'll be like never, sometimes, always, or like often, always, And it's not concerning if people are like, sometimes I feel lonely. It's like, it's like sometimes you feel hungry, you're going to feel lonely. Like if you lose a loved one, you should feel lonely. That indicates that you had a connection there, right? But it's concerning whenever people are like, I'm always lonely. Or there are some studies that pop up where people report that they don't have anyone that they trust. And that's like, okay, like that's not a good sign. But with social isolation, one of the interesting things that I've been reading about, which is kind of cool, is there's like solitude, which is voluntary social isolation. And being by yourself in moments is actually good for you, because it allows for self-reflection, emotional clarity. And there are moments where being by yourself can actually help with loneliness. because you get to understand kind of who you are and what you're going through, and get a greater understanding of yourself. So then you can relate to others better, because you know who you are. But then if you go to New York City, there's I don't know how many people, millions of people in New York City, right?
Yeah.
And everywhere, all around you, you could go to sleep and there's people to the left, above, behind, wherever, all around you. Yet you still feel incredibly lonely. So it's not the presence of people or the lack of people. And really, it's not even the number of friendships or how many times you see people. All of it kind of boils down to the quality, which is why you'll have the people with two really great friends, maybe a romantic partner and a family, and they're happy, and that's the goal, is to find where you're happy, and then to go to your boundary to help others around you. Because we all have, like, with your podcast, you're getting all these people on, and like, you have the battery to do that. You have the energy. So you would be remiss if you didn't go full capacity, while others around you, they don't have as big of a social battery. They got other stuff going. So we're all, and hopefully we all contribute. So then none of us really feel as if we're left behind.
I love that way you're explaining it with the hunger analogy, because I think there is sometimes that, like, you won't starve if you just eat bread every day and drink water, but you will get malnourished at
Yeah.
some point, right? And you're
Right.
like,
Right.
oh,
That's a good point.
I feel like a steak today, or I feel
Yeah.
like a pizza, or I just need some ice cream because I feel bad. And I think it's a really great analogy for relationships too. You're like, oh, I need something. I need a hefty, like, deep conversation here I need to connect with another soul, versus like, I need a whole bunch of candy. I just need to laugh, go out and have fun, and
Yeah.
not talk about anything serious. I've been
Right.
working on serious stuff all day. I need to go play and have some fun. And there are those different buckets. And I love what you said too, that people have different preferences in that. So,
Mm-hmm.
if you like the vegetables of relationships more than you like the carbs, that's okay. You can do that, and that's for you and what you need. It's a cool
Yeah.
analogy.
That's a good point, because typically when it goes awry, when something goes wrong, is whenever people have expectations that are different. So, like, I want to meet
Mhm.
with Mike because I want to talk about my family, and then you're like, oh, I just want to hang out with Chris to laugh and, like, hang out, which is fun. And then you leave the hangout and you're like, dang, I don't feel like that really didn't do it for
Didn't
me.
hit your spot, hit the
Yeah.
spot for you.
And it's like, well, you guys have different expectations, right? So navigating that is really good. One of the things I was
I wanted
thinking
to
of.
highlight one other thing, which is that Cigna study that you mentioned, that they
Yeah.
say that loneliness is as hazardous to your health as, like, smoking a pack a day. Like, it literally will make you sick. And so I think
Yeah.
people need to go out there and they need to talk to people. That's the name of your podcast. And they need to go out and they play. They need to find connections and ways to engage and be playful with other people and recharge those batteries, because you mentioned that too, that your battery just gets emptier, you get drained, and you get this hunger for stuff. And doing all of the other surface level things are, like, to me, it's like looking at pictures of food instead of eating it, right? Going on
Yeah.
Facebook is like, oh, look, there's a picture of a cheesecake. That sounds good. And then not ever having the cheesecake, where getting out and playing and enjoying it and then sharing a cheesecake with another human being is a completely different experience. And it'll leave you a
Yeah.
lot more fulfilled than looking at the pictures of it and liking it on Facebook.
Right. Well said.
So I wanted to ask you about podcasting here and change things up a little bit,
Yeah.
because on this show we like to talk to people who play for a living,
Hmm.
and you've done this. You're fully capable. You graduated with degrees and things of getting a full-time job and working for somebody else, but you have chosen not to. Why did you
Yeah.
make that decision?
Oh man, yeah. I'm asking myself that question too. Uh,
There
I
you go.
think that I was working for, like I said, like a large corporation on a federal contract, flying every week, the suit and tie. I had the corporate phone, the corporate laptop, that life. And it's cool being a part of, like, a big company. And I grew up in a family that didn't have the most resources, and it was all like trades. So I was the
Yeah.
first person in my family to go get a graduate degree and to leave town. And so part of me needed to check that box off of being that, like the George Clooney in the movies, right? Being that guy with the who sits in first class and who has the leather briefcase. But once I was there, I was like, oh man, this is not fun. Like for my personal makeup, like my social wiring, who I am, that wasn't it. And it took me a little while to recognize that. But I always have loved the idea of podcasting. And the reason why is because it's conversations. And not only do you get to have the conversation, but you get to take that conversation, all of the footage, and then edit it and publish it in a way that you present it to the world, which is really cool for me to think about. But what's even cooler for me to think about is when you get several of them and you begin to create a library. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's like a whole
The
story,
evergreen content that's
the
just like
evergreen content,
forever.
right? And it's there and it's there. And these people go on to do, and like we have one of the guys that I had on my podcast, I met up with him last week and he was telling me about the stuff he's doing now. I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's so cool. And it's cool that we get to capture and document those moments. And I had a podcast that I recorded with somebody who I was really excited about to like have a podcast with them. And then I went to go produce a podcast for somebody else and I formatted my SD card without thinking about it. And I
And
wiped
erase.
everything off. And it made me reflect on like, dang, I just lost that conversation, that moment. So it made me reflect on the 35 that I have put up. Like, I'm so grateful that I have those moments. So I'd always wanted to do podcasting. Whenever I left my job, I told my wife, like, hey, I'd like to start a podcast. And I had 15 interviews with different companies. And all of them went awry somehow. I very few of them were they actually like, hey, you're not qualified. A lot of it was just like, hey, we can't do this at this time. So I began to take, like, I had some clients reach out to me who said, hey, I saw your podcast. Could you come teach us how to build a podcast? And that actually created some revenue. And then I lately have been thinking like, well, let's build an actual company that does that. So just
So
recently
tell
I've
us
been
about the
doing that.
Capture Connection Studio.
Yes. So Capture Connection Studios, the whole idea is to capture the audience capture, create connection with your audience capture. So nonprofits especially have a mission and a message and a vision for what they're doing. And they also are really good at sharing that message. But one way to improve communication is to add an additional medium. So what podcasts do is they give them another way to connect with their audience. And it also is a great way to feature sponsors on the podcast and get additional sponsors. So my studio doesn't charge the nonprofits anything out of their operational budget. I don't want them to have to take away from the mission or cause they're actually doing, but instead it helps them get new corporate sponsorships, and then that covers all the production costs. So it's a way for me to give to them and then also create something that they can connect with their audience, feature their staff, and illustrate their own narrative. Because I'm in Lawrence, Kansas, so not too far away from you. But there are some kind of like pressing issues that people have different sides on. And regardless of what the nonprofits do, there's going to be a publication or press that's written about them that may not be the most glowing. So nonprofits, they get the ability to illustrate their own narrative, and podcast is a great human way to do that.
Well, I think there's a bunch of cool stuff to unpack there. One is just having people tell the stories. That's what podcasting does best. So if you're a
Yeah.
nonprofit and you're helping people, tell those people's stories. So more
Mm-hmm.
people see that impact and more people want to help that cause. And when they realize you're making a difference, they jump on board. I also like what you said about corporations and sponsors want to tell that story too. They want an opportunity to say that they're helping this
Yeah.
cause and that they're a part of it. And then the last thing for me, and I guess maybe one of the last questions for you here too, is podcasting is also something that's a bit of a taste that I really
Yeah.
love, the behind the microphone, live in the present moment, a conversation with you. I don't love organizing, publishing, promoting, sharing, editing
Yeah.
forever, getting transcripts, from
Right.
AI, and then proofreading and doing grammar checking on the transcripts and all of that other stuff that is not doing the podcast. So
Yeah.
having somebody that can do that for you is a huge benefit. But
Mm-hmm.
also, I think everybody has different levels of technological expertise too. So
Yeah.
sometimes cameras and lighting can be weird, or microphones and stuff. And it's like, well, just skip all that. Call Chris, let him figure it out. And you worry
Yeah.
about what story you want to tell and what type of show you want to make, right?
Right. Yeah. Let's do the concept development together. Let's figure out your goal, who you want to reach, who you want to be on the podcast. Because just like you and I, we could be podcast hosts.
Huge question.
Right. Or you have so many different angles. I have so many different angles that we could speak from. So let's nail that down. Concept development in itself is so overwhelming, and that prevents, I don't know, the majority of people who consider podcasting from actually doing it. Like, what am I going to podcast about? So I'd love to help people through that, and all that other stuff. Yes, it's a headache. There are so many things that you miss, and then you go back and you're like, oh man, I miss it. And I, you, we were talking about this, but like publishing deadlines, like you record so many, you have some on ice and some go up. Since mine is in person, sometimes it's hard for me to stock up a whole bunch on my personal podcast. So
Yeah.
a lot of the times, like I'm recording week of, and I'm publishing the next week. And so I have to edit all that and do all of that. But it's given me a lot of practice. Hopefully it's kind of like I'm earning while I'm learning, because whenever I'm doing this for other organizations, I'm going to try and make their content better. So then with my personal content, like my dream is to one day be like what you're talking about too, like to travel and talk to people and create conversations that could help others around the whole world. Like that's what I feel called to. So it's like, how can I get there? And one of the ways to get there is to get better, but also to
Yeah.
make money.
Well, I love that. I tell everybody when they ask for my podcasting advice is it's to start doing it. The only way to have a good podcast is to have a bad podcast first. And so like you gotta start, you gotta do it. And 600 episodes later, it adds up, and the numbers look really good, and you can tout that you have 3 million downloads and
That's
all kinds of
incredible.
stuff. But not at the beginning. Not at the beginning. You do awkward interviews that 10 people listen to and stuff, and then you
Right.
figure it out along the way. And there are ways to help, but I think talking to experts, doing it as much as you can, and then finding your audience, your format, and other stuff all happens from doing it. So I love that for you too, that by helping others, you get to collect and curate all of that knowledge. And so, and when you work with a company like Chris's
Yeah.
and Capture Connection Studios, is that they're learning lessons from everybody else. So if somebody
Right.
else finds a cool AI tool that'll edit shorts for social media, Chris is going to hear about it first, and then he can apply that to yours. If you do it on your own, you have to
Right.
learn all those lessons on your own, which means it's a lot more work, a lot more time
Yeah.
investment.
And like I'm seeing your content when it pops up, right? I'm looking at your jokes. I'm like, okay. And we're connected, and there's more podcasters that we're like in this network of. So we get
Yeah.
to see that stuff and be like, okay, like,
Yeah. Let's see what's
and
going on there.
right. And then it influences what we create. And then what we create influences what other people's create. So having someone who's in this space and who's actually doing it is very helpful. And it's not like a good thing right now is I don't have a huge team, right? Like every now and then I'll have people help me out for certain things, but I don't have a huge team. So I get to be the one who works directly with people, and it doesn't drown out. But yeah, thanks for your support and for like talking about it. I see you 600 episodes, man. You've killed it with podcasting, and I'm really grateful to be here on the show because man,
Thanks so much, man.
it's a cool establishment.
I feel like we could talk to each other forever, and we already have for a couple of hours. So I think it's time to play a game. But before we do that, don't forget to check out the Talk to People podcast. And I have an episode over there. And CaptureConnectionStudios.com
Yes, sir.
is the website if you want help podcasting. Chris, are you ready to play a game?
Yeah, I am. I love games.
Here we go. That survey says today we surveyed 100 people. The top answers are on the card. If you get 2 out of 3, if you get one of the answers on the card for 2 out of 3 questions, you win.
Okay.
One is name an expression that starts with the word hi. So fill in the word or phrase hi blank.
Okay. Hi, how are you?
Oh, not up there. No.
Oh man.
Or high roller, high five, high blood pressure,
Oh yeah.
high heels, or high hope.
I thought of
Good. We
HI.
got there. Question number 2. Name something associated with London.
London Bridge.
The London Bridge is number 2. Big Ben, number 1. Queen, fog, and England. Also on the top answers. All right. It all comes down to this, Chris. Final
Okay.
question. You get this, you win. If not, we're all going to laugh at you. No, we're going to just chime in the comments with better answers. Name something people do in their cars when they're stopped at a red light.
Check themselves out in the mirror.
There you go. You got it. Mirror, number 4. Adjust the radio, number 1. Check their cell phone or make a call. Sing, number 3. Look around, eat, or apply makeup. So congratulations. You did it. You got 2 out of 3, which means you win a free 30-second commercial for yourself here. Any asks or gives for the audience? Anything we can do to help you or you can do to help us?
Well, the first thing to help us is to continue supporting Playful Humans. I love this podcast. Shout out to Mike Montague. Everything you can find for me is talktochristmiller.com. You can find the Talk to People podcast. You can find the newsletter I write all about social connection and my production studio. But lastly, my message is life is better when you talk to people. So prioritize relationships, get out there, and you will live a happier, more full, and more healthy life whenever it's full of relationships.
Love it. Chris Miller, Talk to People podcast and Capture Connection Studios. And for more information on Playful Humans, go to playfulhumans.com. We have a playfulness quiz there. You can discover your playful personality and reach out to me. I want to talk to you as well. So Mike at playfulhumans.com. Send me an email. If you're listening to this episode and you made it all the way to the end, you are an awesome person and I appreciate it. I want to know who you are. Mike at playfulhumans.com. And as always, if you can't be good at it. That's what I always say. We'll see you next time.
Don't wait for tomorrow. Live for today. Keep on chasing the sunshine.